Hi everyone, my name is Teresa and I'm the Managing Partner, Australia and New Zealand at Fragomen. Welcome to CEDA's The Role of Migration in Australia's Economic Recovery, where we will be discussing the outlook for migration and its role in our economic recovery. I and CEDA firstly wanted to acknowledge that today and every day we are on Aboriginal land, committed to recognition and reconciliation. We respect elders and we support their stated aspirations. Fragomen is proud to support today's event on behalf of CEDA. As the world's largest sole practice immigration law firm, we are strongly of the opinion, and as we work with multinationals and local businesses, as well as top talent, that migration and migration policy plays a critical part in the economic recovery of Australia, and indeed in the general prosperity, growth and economic well-being of the country. So we're really looking forward to the discussion today. CEDA's 2021 program offers a diverse array of discussion forums to allow people from all corners of the country to participate and to inform and promote debate of critical issues. To keep abreast of the range of events and discussions on the most important issues impacting Australia's economic and social development, we encourage you to visit CEDA's website, ceda.com.au, and where you can also register for upcoming events and watch the recordings of past live streams. CEDA also produces regular podcasts, video interviews and blogs with leading experts and policymakers to ensure you remain up to date with quality information on key issues impacting the economy more broadly. These are also available through the CEDA website. Today, you will be able to interact with speakers through our Q&A portal, and a substantial amount of time has been allocated for questions, and it's available via the link below on the video on your screen. Or you can enter in the details by going to ceda.pigeonhole.at and using the passcode migration. Post your questions, vote on the questions by others, and also vote on today's poll question, which is, how can Australia's migration system be recalibrated to improve outcomes for migrants and the economy? The results of the poll will be shared at the end of the session. You can also join the conversation on Twitter using today's hashtag, which is #migration, all lowercase, and tagging CEDA at CEDA_news. So Australia's migration program is one that has shifted with the times, from first being one based on population building to a program which was practically more heavily weighted to family reunion. The Australian immigration program has become more complex, more codified over time, and I think in the last 2 or so decades in particular has deliberately shifted its focus towards a more heavily skilled migration program, and in more recent years towards a more demand-driven program with features aimed at targeting future growth sectors, particularly skilled people and roles, as well as what are the future skills required in Australia. This has resulted, I think, in one of the most sophisticated, but also one of the most complex and layered immigration skilled programs, temporary and permanent, in the world. Further layered with those policy settings, and as a result of COVID-19, I think the task of migration policy is even more complex. The Honourable Hawke MP became Minister for Immigration, Citizenship, Migrant Services and Multicultural Affairs at the end of 2020. And one of his first acts as Minister was to ask the Joint Standing Committee on Migration to inquire into and report on Australia's skilled migration program, including adjustments necessary for pandemic recovery and to attract the best and brightest global talent. The committee has already provided an interim report, and a broad range of stakeholders, Fragomen included, have also recently provided final submissions to the committee on their views and recommendations as to improvements in the skilled program. Alongside that, CEDA has also undertaken research and reporting on both the temporary and now permanent skilled programs. The Prime Minister finally, I think, spoke very recently about the importance of skilled migration and that the temporary skilled migration in particular needed to be overhauled in the post-COVID era to fill rapidly emerging skill shortages. And so both migration, both temporary and permanent, is certainly a real source of great discussion at the moment. So now I'd like to welcome all of you who are joining us online today, and also those leading this important discussion. Again, the Honourable Hawke MP, Minister for Immigration, Citizenship, Migration Services and Multicultural Affairs, and Melinda Cilento, Chief Executive of CEDA. Minister Hawke will open our discussion today, and I'd now like to welcome him to address the audience. Thank you very much, Minister.
Thanks, Teresa, and thanks everybody for being here today. I want to thank Melinda and CEDA for the invitation. Obviously, we're all at this stage of the last 18 months quite used to the disciplines of these online formats, but looking forward, of course, to the ability to have a chat in person and get back to some of those discussions that are so important. But I do appreciate CEDA putting on this discussion online so we can continue to consult and work together in the pre-budget period that we're here in Canberra. So thank you to CEDA. I'll also just start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land and their custodians, elders past, present, emerging, and acknowledge Aboriginal people who may be present. And I'd start by opening, of course, by saying we are in that pre-budget phase here in Canberra at the moment, where we are setting a new migration program for the year. And I'm recommending to Cabinet many of the changes and adjustments that you will see in the budget that will, of course, take account of the ongoing impacts of the pandemic and the structural changes that I think have happened internationally into our economy, mean that we have a year in immigration unlike any other. We have a bit of a gap year to do some reform and to do some work that we might not have otherwise had, and we're certainly taking up the opportunity to do that work in an unusual environment where we can adjust our system, improve our system to take advantage of what might happen next in a global sense. I would start by saying as well that immigration has played such a fundamental role to Australia. It will continue to do so in our COVID recovery. The government sees the migration program as integral to how Australia will recover from COVID as well, and accessing the skills that we need, the shortages that we will have in our economy as it recovers, will be a high priority for the migration program in coming years. We know that we owe our strength and our prosperity in no small part to the role of migration in the past, and we certainly will owe recovery to accessing and sourcing those skills that will act particularly as job multipliers for Australians, as enablers for businesses to expand and employ and create jobs in regions, but also in cities. And the government's very conscious of that as we are in that global competition as we move through COVID and COVID recovery. I don't really need to tell everybody here that's listening today, but we understand how many people have come from overseas to Australia and successfully integrated. You know, we are one of the most successful multicultural and migrant countries. We've seamlessly integrated people from 300 different ancestries who've come to Australia, and we know half of our population was either born overseas or has had a parent who was born overseas, which makes us pretty unique in world terms. In today's terms, migrant contribution to our economic activity still enriches the Australian community, and what I'm hearing from the community across Australia since coming to the role in December, but also in my roles previously, is an increasing demand for migrants in regional and rural areas for skills that are short. And that has really, I think, if you listen carefully to business, or you listen carefully to state and territory administrations of all persuasions, whether they're Labor or Liberal administrations, or you listen to communities, the message is overwhelming that we need some skills shortages filled, and we need them filled quickly, and there's a huge demand for labour. This is a good thing for Australia because we still have a lot of people on the unemployment queues, so the government's conscious of our skills work and the work we've got to do to transition more people back into jobs, and that process is going well. We have more people employed at the moment than we did at the start of the pandemic, which is a very good development and a sign of recovery. But we're also conscious at the same time of this dual conversation in which everybody is telling us, whether you're from a region or whether you're from a city, of an overheated economy where they cannot access skills and labour to grow business, to meet demand, and to meet critical shortages in the labour market. So the government's very conscious that we will need to meet as many of those shortages as possible in coming months and in the year ahead to make sure that those businesses can grow, that demand can be met, whether you're in primary production or secondary industries, or even working in advanced skills as well. Our economy has a huge supply of jobs, and we'll need to meet those shortages. The skills programs that we have in place will meet some of those, and our Skilling Australia Fund, as you know, is working to do some of that work for Australians. But of course, immediate need for high skills or experience in skills means there will be a gap, and we'll have to meet that through the skill program, probably in an increasing rate when you listen carefully to the state and territory governments and major employers throughout the regions. So I appreciate CEDA's work in that regard. We know that our current reforms that we have made in the last few years, between the 18 and 20 sort of program years, have done a lot to sharpen the labour market focus in terms of our skilled visa programs. Our English language changes, our age changes and work experience requirements, and our new, obviously, migration occupation lists and regional visas have done some really good work and certainly sharpened the focus. There have been some real improvements that I'm happy to share with you. Some of that is new information. I can say to you the average salaries for both the temporary and permanent employer sponsored skill migration streams have increased by about $21,000 since 2016-17, which is a welcome increase. That's the average salary. And obviously today sponsored migrants earn on average over about $100,000 per annum, 20% more in this year, 2020-21, than compared to 5 years ago, which we see as great success. And that's prior to our changes to improve the skill migration settings. So some of that is working as intended to drive a process there of a higher skilled outcome and a higher wage and average environment, and that's worked well. But it doesn't mean the operation of our skilled lists is working perfectly, and that improvements aren't needed to the skills list system. And I'm very conscious of the way that operates between government departments, between ministers, and sometimes the ability of us to react in the skills space needs to be even more flexible during COVID and certainly COVID recovery than it might have done in the past. So the government is doing some work on that, as Teresa noted there, through our Joint Standing Committee inquiry and other work that the government is preparing to increase the ability for us to respond faster to changes in the skills environment. We also have our global talent visa applications demonstrating earnings of at least $153,600 or higher. And I'm happy to speak a little bit about the global talent program, which is achieving quite spectacular results given the pandemic. We know that skilled migrants provide a great boost to the economy. We certainly know that they act as a job multiplying effect. 1 in 3 businesses, small businesses in Australia, are owned or operated by migrants. In fact, that's a third of all our small businesses, which is a great testimony to the work ethic that skilled migration provides. And we're certainly convinced from our modelling that the positive fiscal impact of a skilled migrant, sometimes this argument is in the public domain, I think not well understood, but the positive fiscal impact over the remaining lifetime of a skilled migrant is something that only boosts our economy over the long term. And I know that sometimes that contestability means that those arguments are not well understood. We've had the feedback now from business, and we're certainly missing a lot of people during COVID. We're missing our international student cohorts. We're missing our tourists. And we're missing our temporary visa holders and our arrivals. Certainly the workforce that they provide for our primary production sectors has been demonstrated to be critical. So we know that skilled migration plays an important role in our economic recovery as well. But our temporary migrants also contribute significantly, and we're working to use the flexibility that the government has given to me as Minister to adjust the program as we go, to supply the places against the migration outcomes that we're expected to deliver. And even through COVID, we've been able to ensure we use people onshore who are already here to fill those places, or to provide the temporary workforces, and some of those flexibility measures will continue to be announced in coming months to ensure that we are getting the most out of people and giving the most opportunity for people that have chosen to remain in Australia during the pandemic. So temporary migration as well, and our temporary visa holders here in Australia will continue to play an important role as we continue to follow the vaccination process and then the border reopening process that will take place throughout the course of this year. And apart from that, the direct impact of travel restrictions, the department's visa processing services have been disrupted, I would say to those people here, including third-party providers. It's had a huge impact on the operation of migration in general. So the government has, as Teresa introduced, recommended many different changes, including the partner visa program, which we're working to achieve a record 70,000+ places this year in the partner space, and on track to deliver that at this point in time, although the department's working very hard on that as we go each week. But that is the entire, that is one of the largest partner intakes that we've had. And certainly net overseas migration will forecast to fall, even though we meet our program by about 72,000 at the end of this financial year, which is the lowest level since the Second World War. So that is something we're very conscious of as well. We have obviously adjusted flexibility in our obviously temporary sectors with agriculture and harvest. You're familiar with the seasonal workers program, student visa changes. As I said, more changes will be coming as we take longer through the pandemic and the pandemic recovery to allow for people in Australia to do their absolute best and businesses in Australia to do their absolute best. So flexibility would be the key principle that I would endorse, so that people can know that when they consult with government, we are willing to consider flexibility measures that we may not have been able to consider prior to the pandemic, and that will continue to be the case in this environment. Certainly my approach as Minister. Had plenty of sectors in front of me, plenty of sectors lobbying for more flexibility measures, and the government's very sympathetic to MAC flexibility within the migration program within Australia as we continue to move forward. In many other places, we're looking forward to the next step of how to be ready to compete in the global environment for talent. Australia has done very well in terms of setting itself up as an attractive destination for people to want to come, not just because of the security that's been provided from the health outcome of the pandemic, but also the economic environment. There are more people in more countries looking at Australia now at a higher level with capital, investment, business and talent who want to come to Australia right now, and we're very conscious that we need to be ready to capitalise on that always existing competition for skills and talent internationally, but also take advantage of the sacrifices that Australians have made during the pandemic to ensure our migration program accesses that competition as well. And you've seen with our Global Talent Independent program, we've got 15,000 places available in the 2021 year in very critical target sectors. I won't read those out, but there's plenty of great examples that exist from this program, from the Global Talent Independent program. We've got obviously med tech researchers from the United States, data sciences, data scientists, doing some amazing critical problem solving in the mining industry. These critical sectors and this sourcing of talent in the global talent independent sector is one of the great achievements of the migration program over the course of the last year, and continue to be a focus in the coming year as we see a very high level skills and talent movement towards Australia and countries like Australia for the safety, security and economic opportunity, and the real high level skills investment that the government's making in so many ways. We've got fintech, we've got digital industries, we've got health technology, we've got biomedical scientists, we've got all kinds of success that we're seeing through the global talent applications right now. And the task force that has been established to attract high-value business and exceptionally talented individuals will also continue to, develop those networks who want to remake Australia as their home, which of course enables more industries, more jobs, and more economic activity here in Australia. So today I could talk a lot about everything we're going to do in the budget. I'm not allowed to do that. So I did want to note that we have made a very significant investment, that's over $1 billion, in the adult migrant English program. And this is a key change that is not well understood by many people, but I think here for CEDA and others who really understand what the government is doing here, we are making a huge investment in the success of migrants and people who come through the migration program, the humanitarian program, and that is by uncapping the number of hours that people can now access English language tuition. Totally uncapped from a previous cap of 500 hours. And as you can see, we're backing that up with an actual $1 billion so that people can get those English language skills to change their circumstances, to enhance their employability, to get jobs, and to advance up the economic ladder of success. And I really think that's one of the biggest changes that has gone unnoticed in migration over a long time. It's a very significant investment for this government to make in people, in capital, and in human capital, that is, and their success. I think we'll see that impact of that change through the migration program turn around some people's lives and make sure that they have those opportunities that they may not have had. In summary, I'd say we're very proud of the contribution migrants have made to Australia, where we know the success stories that they bring. Our skilled program, the government is focused on a well-managed program that is dedicated to a majority of skilled migrants, with a strong family program as well, that will meet our needs in terms of COVID recovery. It's a unique time. It's a period where we've probably seen nothing like it before. And, I think we have to be ready to be flexible and make sure that we have those measures in place that you've recommended, that other people have suggested, to take advantage of the sacrifice that Australia's made, the work that the government's done, and the state through National Cabinet to have Australia well placed, not just on a health level, not just on a safety level for now, but also on a very strong economic footing, with great certainty, with a great investment certainty horizon, with a very strong track record of welcoming and encouraging significant investment into Australia as well. So you'll see, I think, this year a strong commitment from the government to skilled migration and to its success, and that enabling effect in our regions in particular, but also in cities of job multiplying, job creation, and supporting COVID economic recovery. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, and I think that's a really fantastic summary in terms of the really excellent work that the government is doing in this area, and I was really pleased to hear around particularly the English language support, and given the really positive impact that will make. I might now turn to you, Melinda, just to make some additional comments and observations. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Teresa, and thank you, Minister. Let me start by saying that, I think the emphasis the Minister's placed on the importance of migration is obviously something that CEDA strongly agrees with, and it's one of the key reasons why we focus on this area so much in our own research. We like to talk about Australia's brand of economic development and to identify the factors that have really underpinned this tremendous record of economic success that we've had, including now through COVID, in terms of the strength of recovery we're seeing. And as we try to look at how we're going to reimagine Australia's economic future in light of COVID and everything else that's happened, putting immigration front and centre is critical, given the important role that it's played in our economic development and social development for decades now. Our most recent report looked particularly at permanent migration, but as you yourself, Teresa, spoke to, we've also done some work on temporary migration. So I just wanted to quickly talk to each of those and also just sort of put some context around the way in which CEDA is trying to engage in this topic and the sort of principles, if you like, that are framing our recommendations. Now, firstly, I think one of the things that people tend to do or may do is actually see the contribution of migration to economic growth and development as just a numbers game. And it's so much more than that. As the Minister himself sort of spoke to, migrants bring higher skill levels, particularly over the last quarter of a century where we've been really focusing on skilled migration. They add to human capital in this country. They bring ideas, they bring innovation, but they also lift productivity and the skills of others around them in the workplace. people who are watching them, learning by doing. So they bring a really dynamic benefit to the economy. Our past research has really underscored this issue of how important migration is, and that it doesn't come at the cost or a cost to Australian workers or Australian jobs, if I can put it that way, that there really is a net benefit, and the Minister spoke to that. As I said, our work in 2019 looked at temporary migration. I think one of the things that report did was actually remind people just how important temporary migration is. And we've seen that through COVID in terms of some particular sectors that have really been missing that supply of workers, if you like. The 2019 report showed that at that point, there were 2 million temporary migrants in Australia. 2 million, like that's such a significant number. More than half of those were working in 4 sectors: accommodation and food services, information, media and telecommunications, professional, scientific and technical services, and other services. There are areas where when people now are talking about where they're struggling to get skills, that's one of the things that you can really see is matching up. Those occupations are the areas where we're hearing people are struggling to find the skilled workers they need. Interestingly, I think one of the other things that's not well understood is that temporary migration is a path to permanent migration. And our 2019 report showed that 55% of temporary migrants actually found their way into permanent migration. So it's not just the temporary skills, but they're actually the pipeline into that permanent boost to skills that we get here in Australia. As I said earlier, our most recent research has focused on the importance of permanent migration and particularly permanent skilled migration. To put some context around just how important that's been to us in Australia, over the past 70 years, Australia has welcomed 7 million permanent migrants. And it's that number which underpins the number of people in this country who are either migrants themselves or have parents who are migrants. In the last decade alone, we welcomed 2 million permanent migrants. These are really significant numbers, and they're really significant numbers when you think about the skills that they're also bringing and the lift to our skills and innovation in Australia. I think overall, CEDA is a believer that the migration system in Australia, particularly the permanent migration system, has worked really well. But if I can put it this way, as we recover, it is absolutely going to have to be on its game if we're going to achieve the economic and social success that we want as a nation. That's why I think it was really interesting in our most recent report that we identified 1 in 4 skilled migrants is actually working below their skill level. That's a waste to them, and it's a waste to our economy. In terms of the wages lost to those individuals, the price that we put on that was $1.25 billion. So it's a really significant issue. I think the other things that are really important to call out from our report is that we were just flagging that the system is not keeping up with these rapidly emerging skill demands. And I think the Minister was speaking to that and alluding to that as well. The example that we talk to is data scientists. I know it's an often used anecdote now, but it's really, really critically important. And if I can put some context around that in terms of the feedback I'm hearing from members, it is a consistent sort of insight, if you like, that members are struggling to get the skills that they need, and particularly in the digital and data space. And if you think about it, we've heard from almost every business that they've really accelerated their digital and data over the last 12 months in order to survive COVID. A lot of those businesses have accelerated their transition, if you like, but they haven't embedded those technologies and they haven't reformed their business processes to enable them to make the most of those technologies. To do that, they need skills, and they need them really, really quickly if we're going to leverage that great transformation to the prosperity and economic growth that we think we can achieve in the years ahead. So I think, yes, there have been some changes, but what I'm hearing from members is that more is needed. Let me just talk really quickly to the sort of approach that we've taken at CEDA. The permanent skilled work that we've just released showed that where you get the best match in skills is when business is really close to it. So our recommendations were really looking at how you could build a pragmatic approach that would itself be agile over time and not require continual change, and put business right at the heart of that process. So it's about real time. It's about a pragmatic approach that builds in ongoing agility rather than requiring change and change and change and change. We made a proposal that you could build an online platform that would allow that to happen. You could pilot it and then grow it as experience built. So we actually think that's a pretty pragmatic solution to the sorts of issues that we're hearing from our members. And the final point I'd make, Teresa, is that a lot of what we've emphasised is how can we get more transparency in the system and more visibility so that the community is brought along with what's happening and they understand the benefits and they can see what's happening. And therefore, we don't have to have this sort of continual sort of change or the sort of ongoing sort of need for ad hoc flexibility, if I can put it that way. So I think there's a lot more I could add, and I can talk directly to the specific recommendations, but I think we want to allow plenty of time for comments and questions, so I'll stop there. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Melinda, and just kind of outlining some of the great work of CEDA and research. And I think this common theme that also the Minister had also mentioned was around those pathways to allow people to come in, but you've also mentioned that pathway of temporary to permanent, which is increasingly more important to bring in skilled labour is I think a point of a lot of discussion and with businesses as well. So we have around 20 minutes for questions. Once again, thank you, Melinda. Thank you, Minister Hawke. Please put your questions through Pigeonhole. So just a reminder, that is ceda.pigeonhole.at, and use the password migration or uppercase, and we'll endeavour to answer as many questions as possible during the next 30 minutes. Whilst we're just waiting for those questions, I might just begin and maybe just start with a really broad question for you, Minister, which is around, I think, the complexity of Australia's migration program and where it is at the moment, where we have, 100 odd subclasses. We've got various streams under there. Some of them are particularly similar, particularly those where businesses are seeking to bring in workers or trainees and so on for different reasons. There's also quite a lot of replication, perhaps in terms of some of the documents that are provided and the extent of those. And of course, we've got the technology angle as well. So I'm really interested to hear from you, Minister, in terms of, I know that over the past probably almost decade, there's been on the agenda simplification and how to do that in a pretty complex world, and Australia's a really big place. Just wondering if you could give us some insight as to whether or not that is on the agenda and what some of the, your views are in terms of simplification, whether it is in law and policy or from an operational side or from a technology point of view as well.
Yeah, thanks, Teresa. That is a broad question. Thank you for that. I've been in the portfolio before in a more junior role, and certainly nothing has changed in a long time in an Australian sense. I mean, the Migration Act is as complex as the Tax Act in many ways and sort of functions in the same way. I understand what you say about that. But our migration system itself actually functions pretty well and as intended. I'm sure people here would agree. Certainly seamless in its delivery of students. We've been through various iterations of student visas, and the system works very well at a high level economic export sector. Tourists, high level economic, export sector. Certainly for the movement of people and goods, well functioning and as intended. So simplification for simplification's sake is sometimes in business and commerce those things are elegant and attractive. In law and in migration that can be complex, and I don't need to tell people here, but my portfolio is the most litigated Commonwealth portfolio. It is, the department directly employs 160 lawyers, give or take, before we take on counsel. I'm involved, they tell me, in any one day in 30,000 actions, roughly, as minister. So, it's lawyers, I could say it's all lawyers' fault. I could probably just say it's all lawyers' fault. But, also in the parliament, to be fair to lawyers, just for a moment, I'll be fair to them, within parliament, migration bills are very difficult to get passed. I've got 6 or 7 very important migration amendment bills in front of the Senate. And the partisan nature of migration has been regrettable because it means they're difficult to even just sensible improvements will often have bizarre amendments tacked onto them or things that are totally non-relevant. And simplification has been violently opposed by, various elements of the unions and other things, and even suggesting it's privatisation, even when it's simple simplification, which is we don't need to have a conversation about privatisation today. So notwithstanding those challenges, I think a lot of the legacy visa issues are not really that relevant. Many of those 100 visas you name they're not contemporaneous. They're legacy visa holders. They don't get in the way of the functioning of the system as intended. Only if you're looking at it as a whole and you want to say how can we make this all simpler. But as long as the Migration Act and the system is servicing the needs of the sector and the migration and the government's demands, then it's doing its job. It doesn't mean we don't need to change. But as you know, we've had a conversation around using technology to improve service performance and outcomes, and that is very important to the government. We will be pursuing that. We have, obviously, as you know, changed our requirements publicly about that, how that will be done. That will be a government process, but using technology, of course, to be ready to deliver and ensure we have high performance in visa processing and visa services through government means, using technology to allow for better performance and better outcomes. So we are investing and seeking to invest in that as a government and make those changes. I could really talk all day with this broad remit you've given me, but you might have some actual questions from people. I'll stop complaining about lawyers.
Thank you, Minister. I think, Melinda, were you about to make a comment as well?
Well, thanks, Teresa. I thought I'd be a little bit cheeky and throw a specific example to the Minister. And actually, sorry, there was one thing I wanted to say earlier too, which is, one, I think the English language skills commitment is really, really important because it was a critical issue flagged in our report in terms of a factor contributing to people struggling to get work once they had arrived on a skilled migrant visa. But perhaps if I could put an example of where simplification could be achieved that we recommended following the temporary skilled migration report was actually just getting a dedicated streamlined process for intra-company transfers. So multinational corporations who are working here in Australia who tend to manage their people across borders, I think there are things like that where you could streamline that seem pretty straightforward that our business members are telling us would be incredibly useful.
Yeah, thanks, Melinda. I don't have a lot to say to that. I think there's strong arguments for greater flexibility in the way those sort of skilled visas are constructed. I think those arguments are being considered as part of the review and so part of the government's thinking. I think we've seen changes to temporary visas and others where people can work between employers recently. As we move into a more mobile economy and a highly competitive space, we're certainly open to those kind of flexibility measures that I've highlighted throughout my presentation today. So there's good arguments around that.
No, thank you. So we do have a couple of questions. One is probably a really interesting question, and it comes off the back of really the Enscope Codes, which you both reference. Melinda, you particularly were talking around that in terms of the mismatch, new occupations, new roles, new future roles, and how do we improve upon that? And a lot of the skilled migration program is embedded through these what are fairly redundant occupation lists. So Cherie Wright has put in a question that says, given the limitations of Enscope, is there any merit in removing specific occupational classification / lists and instead focusing on the highly skilled nature of the position through other indicia, such as earnings? So just wanted, some kind of comments around, you spoke, Minister, around flexibility. That would be quite a big level of flexibility, just kind of looking towards what your initial thoughts might be around looking at criteria beyond actual Enscope codes and lists.
Yeah, well, you're really covering the whole spectrum of things I don't want to Enscope codes being one of them. Look, I think what we've done is, essentially bypass that process with many arrangements to capture occupations like you were talking about, data scientists and others with other mechanisms. I'm certainly about to update the priority skills list that we developed last year during the pandemic, the PIMSOL, and we've certainly got our short-term and long-term lists, as you know. So there's no doubt we've known this is, an issue for some time. Certainly, I'm in favour of a more modern system. We'll be pursuing pathways to get to a more modern system. I think it's been 2006 since we had the last review of the Enscope Codes. And essentially, we work around those with priority new emerging skills and areas. I think most people here would think that was a functional process, but equally, there's a lot of work to do here. But if government has another review of that will take some time. I think in the current environment, we need to move a lot faster than that. So, skills list changes, I'll certainly be recommending some improvements to those as we go through the course of the pandemic, and changes will come a lot faster than a process to review the Enscope codes, but I certainly support an improvement to that system.
Melinda.
Yeah, thanks, Teresa, and thanks for the question, because I think this goes right to the heart of the issue, and I apologise, Minister, this is maybe a little bit unfair, but let's go here. I think every time you have to bypass the system, it creates uncertainty and concern in the community, actually, that the system's not working. And even when you do it for the right reasons, I think that's one of the challenges. So, again, if I go back to our recommendation, it is precisely to sort of get an agile, real-time approach that puts the needs of business right at the centre of this program. And, one of the critical issues is that, and I think this goes to the question that was being asked, is that it's not just the skills, but it's how the skills are going to be used in the workplace. And that's what business understands. So the classification codes are just a clumsy element of that. And the cheap shot around data scientists is that, yes, it's now in the list, but it's also in a category that involves lobbyists and electoral officers. So I just think, I know it's a cheap shot, but it is a sign that system is really struggling to keep up. Yes, Australia has done well. Yes, our economy is recovering. But as the vaccines roll out really quickly in other countries, their economies are also recovering really quickly. And they too have the same opportunity, which is for every digital process that's been embedded, there's more data. And that is rolled gold in terms of future opportunity. So if we don't get on top of this, we are really going to miss an opportunity, I think.
There was no doubt we'll use this year to overhaul some of that, and we are doing that in several processes. We do have to be ready to compete. It's a bit esoteric while we can't move people in any substantial way because we can't physically move them in here. But it is important that we use this time to be ready to do that. Look, I don't have any issues with what category it's in with other employments. I wouldn't make any comments. I'm not sure that's helpful, if I'm being cheeky back to you. But I do hear what you're saying, and I think your recommendation here is a strong one about this. Obviously we need to make sure that the classification systems and the skill systems meet the real world demand of a globalised economy, and certainly we've got to use the time this year to improve our systems, no doubt about that.
Thank you. So we have another question, and again, it's probably related to this issue around attracting top talent, and again, this where there's some pathways to permanent residence, but there's some pathways that are not particularly clear. And I know that the interim report mentioned recommendations of temporary, more clearer pathways to temporary to permanent. Melinda in that CEDA report has as well. In fact, Fragomen surveyed our own clients as well, which are largely corporates. Same thing around that consistency and confidence of bringing in people, temporary to permanent. So the question, which is actually anonymous, is actually around international students. Is the government considering changing visa policies to attract more international students to Australia For instance, providing pathways to permanent residency, like in Canada?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. I mean, this is a difficult area. Unlike skilled, I think the permanent residency offering is important, and the government's considering the permanent residency offering in many different categories. With students, we already have a question about the total capacity in a normal environment of how many several 100,000 students we can take within Australia at one point. A $12 billion export industry in Australia. The purpose of studying is to come and study in Australia and return home, and the government's policy is clear on that. So the permanent residency offering comes for particularly high-end skills and shortages that the Australian economy needs. The purpose of the student system is to obviously study and return. So we don't have a particular process to look at permanent residency for students. We are very conscious of the fact that during COVID, we really have to work hard on this sector to make sure Australia remains competitive internationally. We've obviously offered the ability to study offshore and online. That's important for the time being, and we're very aware of the offerings other countries are providing in terms of education and how to be ready to take advantage as a brand Australia of the international education sector, to be ready to ensure we can return those students to Australia as soon as it's the health advice and the vaccination advice allows us to do that. But the permanent residency side of that, there isn't any change in government policy.
Okay. So I think we probably have time for one last question. I might actually club two questions together because they're really similar. It really deals with the immediate now, during COVID, policies and perhaps flexibility there. So there's two questions. I'll read them both out. One is from Mark Glasbrook. Why won't the department amend Section 48 and Regulation 2.12 during the pandemic period to allow genuine applicants to apply for a visa onshore if they have had a visa refused or cancelled onshore? And the second one is from Sasko Markovsky. Given the importance of retaining skilled workers in Australia, are there any changes being considered for skilled TSS visa holders under the short-term stream to provide them with a pathway to remain, particularly obviously during this pandemic period? So I thought I'd finish with just some of the immediate concerns that I think some businesses are dealing with.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, it's a bit confusing because we had the two questions together. I mean,
I have, sorry.
And Mark is showing off again. I don't know every single visa number and section of the Migration Act off the top of my head. That would be hard. But the TSS issue, which I understand is a second issue, let me go to that first because that was a bit easier or clearer for me to do. And you're saying they're similar. We're talking about people who are onshore and their ability to, stay onshore or reapply visas, and
essentially, yes.
That's an important issue. So, we have announced several measures during COVID, including new visas 408, where people can do catch-all. Basically, it's a catch-all visa to allow people to stay for temporary periods and do activities. I'm interested in people's feedback about that, Mark included, and everybody else about how that's going or how that meets people's circumstances, because the take-up isn't as high as we might have liked, and I don't know, no one's really providing advice about whether that's a lack of awareness or a lack of design features or whatever that might be, but that's supposed to be one of the mechanisms to capture people onshore. And I'm certainly open. I have done things that I probably would never have done as a minister, 2 years ago while COVID's on, same with previous occupants of this role, to provide flexibility. We're very conscious of keeping people who are providing support to the economy here. We don't have new intakes of people and students, they're going to be enrolments will be down this year for the first time. While we held up for a year, they'll be down. New workforces from our, working holiday makers and others, they're not available. So, and then on your TSS, if someone's doing a critical function, we're certainly open to that visa being extended or continuing during the COVID period. And we've made a series of announcements. More announcements will come through the course of the year. The Section 48 issue, I'll have to take some advice and come back to Mark about that. I'm sorry, it's a bit specific. No,
that's wonderful. And not expecting you, obviously, to know the ins and outs of various provisions in the Migration Act and regulations. So thank you very much for responding to that.
My point is, I don't want to say to Mark, I don't want to say something on this online thing that'll it's the case today. That'll give me 30,001 cases and I'm being litigated against as minister today. So I have to watch my P's and Q's on specific questions.
Hey, Teresa, I'm not going to go to Section 99C of the Act either, but I did just wanted to loop back, if I could, on the question of students. I mean, I've got to say this, Minister, I know you've heard this, but, you know, obviously all of our university members are really looking forward to being able to welcome students back as quickly as possible. And we're hearing a very strong message about their great concerns. If we don't start sending some clear signals on this, that students will start heading to the Northern Hemisphere and taking up opportunities in the UK and Canada in particular. But in regard to, you know, the process and the opportunity for students to become permanent migrants, our work has shown is that the vast majority of students do actually return home. But the point I wanted to make too, though, is that there are some organisations, and I've been involved with a company that was really focused on this, that making sure that they got their talent. They were very focused on the best of the international students who are here and trying to attract them and then actually find a pathway into permanent residency for them based on the skills that they brought. And so I do think as we look to really advance our competitiveness, we've got to have every tool in the kit bag that we possibly can. And when we come and educate people, when people come here to be educated, they get a fantastic education. They've got the right skills. You know, where we can look to capitalise on that. I think there's real value in that.
Thank you.
No, thanks. And we've probably got really just another minute. I might ask you just something, Melinda, just off the back of all of this. I mean, the CEDA report talked about some US research and was talking about almost boom and bust in demand for various skills from time to time, and that kind of potential cyclical nature of roles. How does that complicate this issue about attracting people into the country, whether temporarily or that pathway to temporary and permanent? What's just your thoughts around that? I know it's, again, a pretty open question, but it was a really interesting kind of research that you noted in that paper.
Yeah, and I think we can all point to anecdotes where you could sort of see that happening where, you know, the resources sector, for instance, you might have certain skill needs. I know at the moment one of the issues that people are talking to me about is with so much infrastructure being built, whether we've got all of the skills in Australia that we need in terms of project management and things like that. And the point I'd make is that I think that's where you need the agility. That's where you need a system that's able to respond quickly. And the more codified, to use your language, the system is, that the harder that is. The other point I'd make, though, is that often people might come in for a particular role, but, you know, to my point earlier, if they bring high levels of skills and then they apply those in a particular way in an organisation, over time, the applicability of those skills may broaden. And if they can slot into other skills opportunities in Australia and they're continuing to add to our skill level and productivity, you know, why not? So I just think it's all about agility and it's all about transparency and responsiveness of a system, and in our view, trying to build that in rather than having this, what we've called the revolving door of reviews. And just to pick up a final point that the Minister made, and to sort of reinforce and acknowledge this, is that, of course, we then have to do the very best that we can in filling our own skill needs and building capabilities here through our own education and training. And the proposal that we put forward, we think, provides visibility on the skills that are quickly emerging, which sends signals not only to skilled migrants, but also to the broader education community here.
Great. No, thank you very much, Melinda. So really I wanted now just to, I think we've now closed off on the Q&A. We'll attempt to respond to those other questions that have come through at another point. Really like to thank our participants today, the Honourable Alex Hawke MP and Melinda. Thank you very much for providing your insights and expertise. I also wanted to share the results of the poll question, which was, as a reminder, how can Australia's migration system be recalibrated to improve outcomes for migrants? and the economy. And there were kind of three responses people could make or, put their name against. One was create government-regulated online skills matching jobs platform. That was 7.7%. Ensure migration contributes to the maturing of our local labour market. That was 15%. And overwhelmingly at 77%, the response was to increase clarity across criteria used to assess in-demand jobs. And I think that is really reflective of the discussion today in terms of how we can be as agile as possible, as innovative as possible, and meet the demands not just now and in the immediate, but kind of predict the future as well. So really, really interesting to see those results. Really just wanting to finalise just the session today. Obviously, the issues of migration, both temporary and permanent, I should say, are ever present, ever relevant. And really forums like these are a really productive way to keep the topic and conversation about this really very important issue alive, and particularly as we move and head towards economic recovery post-COVID. And Fragomen is obviously really very supportive of policy developments in this area that will lead to improvements in the economic wellbeing and growth of Australia. And really also just to mention, Australia's migration program in the world is so highly regarded. Other countries do look at what Australia is doing very much. So we have a really sophisticated system, but I also look forward to what those improvements might be to just keep the program as agile and current as possible. I'd also like to thank the audience for their participation in the discussion and remind everyone that this discussion has also been recorded and will soon be available on the CEDA website to rewatch and share with your colleagues and network. You can also keep up to date with CEDA's programs by visiting www.ceda.com.au and register for the following upcoming events via the website. Strength and Resilience in Australia's Financial System is on next week on the 28th, and Australia's Aged Care Workforce Post-Royal Commission is on the 6th of May. Finally, please continue the conversation by connecting with CEDA via LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. We hope you found today's discussion productive, interesting, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you and goodbye for now.